Okay, it's 7:15. We'll go ahead and get started. We do have several people here in the room. We also have one that's joining us remotely. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to Clayton City Hall. This is a continuance of the discussion we've been having really over a long time. It seems like 16 months or so that we've been talking about the proposal from Washington University in Concordia. We had a meeting at the high school a couple of months ago, and now we're following up with neighborhood level meetings. And what we're looking for in these meetings is really constructive feedback and conversation related to the draft overlays that have been prepared and that have been posted on engageclayton.com. So talking through that, along with the traffic analysis that was performed and the proposed changes along the Big Bend right away for that. One thing just to note for the people in the room, if you'd like to speak or ask a question, we've got some microphones here. You'll just need to be sure to use the microphone so that anyone on Zoom can hear what you're saying and that it goes into the actual recording. So let me pull up the presentation. And just like the other presentations that we've given to date, the recording of this session, along with the presentation, those will be uploaded to engageclayton.com, so you can go back and take a look at that at any point in time if you need to reference anything. So I'm going to start off talking about the same thing I always start off with, which is just zoning generally, the purpose of zoning and kind of what we're working with on these particular sites at the moment. So the purpose of zoning is to regulate use, intensity, and bulk. And that's the easiest way to really break down what's a very complex set of regulations. And so when we talk about use, we're talking about just that, the use or the utilization of land or buildings. So how specifically is it going to be utilized? Is it institutional in nature, commercial, residential? It can be a number of different things. There's also the intensity of land use. So within a given use, you can have varying intensity. So if you think about residential uses, for instance, you can have a single family home, which is a very low intensity use, or you could have a high rise apartment building, a multifamily building that's much more intense in nature. And we're talking about intensity. It's taller. You've got more traffic. You've got everything that comes along with that, more infrastructure needs. So there's varying intensity within your zoning codes, and we seek to regulate that. And then finally, the bulk of the use. And the bulk is talking about the physical characteristics of the development itself. So how close are buildings to the property line? How tall are structures on the site? How much of the ground is actually being taken up by the physical characteristics of the use? So those are the three things that we tend to regulate. And so to get a bearing on the zoning, and I know you've all heard me say this before, everything over here is zoned single family residential that we'll be talking about this evening. That's the current zoning. So that's the Washington University South 40 campus, along with the Concordia Seminary property as well. So we're going to really focus on these two. We've tailored some of the other neighborhood meetings specifically towards the areas they're adjacent to. Since you're really close to both of these, we're going to talk about South 40 and Big Bend together this evening. But the one thing I really want to point out here is that everything is in bright yellow, which is single family residential again, which is really unusual. I don't know of any other city anywhere that regulates institutional uses and universities using single family zoning. And the way we do that currently is through the conditional use process. And so essentially, we'll talk about uses here in a minute. What that means is that a use is presumed to be appropriate for that particular area. And you recognize that with that appropriateness, there could be elements of that use that you may want to regulate through conditions. So the use itself is okay, but there may be things that come along with that we want to put conditions on to try to mitigate any potential issues. So that's what we currently have in place. And so we'll get into that with a little more specificity here in a moment. But if you remember the meeting at the high school, and a lot of you look familiar from that meeting and our other discussions, what we've been working on is an overlay district, and doing that in lieu of this regulation that's more piecemeal that we've been doing through conditional uses, in trying to establish all the rules up front so that it's predictable for everyone involved, not just the university and the city, but most importantly for the residents, that you know what the rules are for any development that might occur. And so that all that's done proactively and is well planned, rather than reacting to each individual permit that comes in for these projects. The other thing I want to point out is there seems to be a misconception to some extent that the overlay district is just enabling the institutions to do this. And that otherwise the city has the ability to just say no under the current provisions that are in the code. And that's not necessarily the case. Because again, we say that everything that's being proposed by Washington University is a conditional use, meaning it's appropriate. We just recognize that there are some elements that we may want to control through conditions. So I just want to be very clear that, the idea that we can just say no to all of this doesn't really exist. The question is, do we want to be proactive about the regulations and have these community conversations about the potential nuisances and what might help mitigate those? Or do we want to react to applications that may come in? So, if we decided to just drop this process altogether, we'll just end up getting a stack of conditional use applications, and we're going to have to deal with this topic, but just in a different way. So really, from a, looking at this from a planning perspective, it's much better, we feel, to regulate at the outset, at the beginning, so that we all know what the rules are going to be. And if we can put the right set of rules in place, then we feel like there's benefit to everyone. So tonight, as we go through this, if you have feedback on the draft overlays or those parameters, that's really what we're looking for. If you want to talk further about noise or lighting or setbacks or height, those other things that you may have concerns about, this is a great opportunity for that. So as far as the overlay districts, as we went to craft those, the biggest concern, of course, is the first thing here, which is preserving neighborhood character and quality of life for residents. So that's our focus, that's our mission, and that's what we're trying to accomplish here. And that's trying to balance all of the interests, of course. So you have interest with the institutions. We run into this with commercial all the time where it butts residential. It's trying to balance all of those community needs and wants, but in the end, protecting the residents that are adjacent to those other use types. The three primary concerns we hear from residents on not just, really every zoning project, but not just the proposal that we'll talk about this evening, is that people don't want to hear it. They don't want to see it, they don't want to hear it, and they don't want traffic or parking in their neighborhoods. These are the things that we have to solve for on nearly every project that comes before the Plan Commission and Board of Aldermen. When we're talking about don't want to see it, the things we're always talking about are building heights, transition zones, and in this case, lighting when we're talking about athletic fields in particular. They don't want to hear it, which is you can control through decibel limits, setbacks and transition zones again. And then finally, not wanting traffic or parking in neighborhoods. We do that by regulating where access points could be within an overlay, and then also making sure that there's on-site parking available for those uses so that it doesn't spill over into the surrounding neighborhoods, or in this case, into Oaknell Park as well. And so to get your bearings, again, Danforth campus, which is actually located in unincorporated St. Louis County. It's not within the city of Clayton. It's bound by Forest Park Parkway to the north, Forsyth Boulevard on the south, and then you can see Skinker here to the east and Big Bend to the west. The South 40 campus, which you're all familiar with, is at the corner of Big Bend and Forsyth, shown here with the dark black line around it. This Concordia Seminary property is located here. And we're primarily going to be talking about the western end of the Concordia site. That's where the change of use is proposed. And I always mention the CBC site down here because that's an important piece of this whole thing, which I'll point out in a second. So the first phase of this long-term project, because this would be a phased development of sorts, is Concordia Seminary's housing relocation. So the multifamily housing they have along Big Bend is not in the best shape. It needs to be either heavily reinvested in or relocated. Concordia's made the decision to rebuild new housing that's closer to the central part of their campus so that it's more convenient for their students and any faculty that may be over there. So the first step would be to take the housing out that's located along Big Bend and then replacing that in a central location on the site. Doing so frees up that end, the western end of the Concordia campus, where Washington University would then take the athletic uses that are at the corner of Forsyth and Big Bend and relocate those to the Big Bend overlay site that's shown here, along with the intramural field and some of the other athletic uses that are at the CBC site. So all of those would be relocated to the Big Bend overlay district. What that does is it frees up land on the South 40 area so that they could build more housing or reconfigure the housing that's already there. There's a lot of competition between universities to have nice updated student housing. So I think there's a long-term desire for Washington University to to keep pace with other universities that are out there and continuously reinvent themselves on that South 40, but move that density up towards the corner, which is away from these residents, and try to get it closer to the Danforth campus. And then as far as the CBC site, the hope is that if the intramural field and the other athletic uses that are there, so like crew practice and some other things that are indoors, if those move toward to the Big Bend site, and then of course it frees up the CBC site potentially for redevelopment down the road. So I know that's something the city is certainly interested in, being that that's prime frontage there on Clayton Road. And so we didn't have this at the meeting at the high school, but it's really important to show, I think. There have been a lot of questions just about, hey, there may be some athletic uses there, but there's going to be a lot of land left over that may end up being other things, where all of a sudden they want to put dormitories or classrooms or other things on the site. And these are just some really high level conceptual test fits that show, the uses that are known. So baseball field, softball field, intramural field, maybe some tennis courts or a gym building. That once you start putting these on the site with parking, you realize that you run out of land pretty quickly when you have the transition zones that we've put into the overlay regulations along the edges, kind of taking away that area for development. And as soon as you start laying the big fields there, you can see you run out of room pretty quickly. So there's 8 different just conceptual drawings on here, configurations. Here's 2 that I've just picked randomly to kind of blow up so you could take a look. But you can see once you start laying out those big fields again, here's a soccer field, baseball, softball, a gym, maybe some future soccer. But then you start to put in the parking and other facilities, along with the fact that this site probably be terraced, because as you know, from a topography standpoint, you're going downhill as you move to the south. It's going to be a limiting factor as to how much stuff can actually go onto this site. So a couple of test fits just to give you an idea of what it may look like with various fields. So let's talk for a minute about uses. And this again is what is currently allowed in our code. So we currently allow colleges and universities, provided the buildings do not occupy more than 1/3 of the area site, and the height, location, and use does not have a serious or depreciating effect on adjacent residential property. Pretty wide open. It just says colleges and universities. It doesn't get specific about the types of uses or the types of university functions that are actually allowed on the site. It's just open-ended, whatever they may want. It fits into this category, and we just go through the conditional use process to, again, try to mitigate any negative impacts. And then as far as accessory uses, I'm not going to read all this because it's a very long sentence that doesn't say a whole lot. It basically just means that any accessory use that may support the primary use is also allowed on the site. And so an accessory use for a university, again, could be a whole list of things, but that list isn't actually provided anywhere in the code. They could apply for really anything, and we would have to consider it as long as they can tie it to the university function. So that's what's currently on the books. As you can see, we're pretty reactionary with it. And so we wanted to tighten things up quite a bit through the overlay and get specific with the types of uses that could be permitted on these sites. So as far as the proposed permitted uses, it's really important to point out, first of all, that any use that is not expressly listed as a permitted use or an accessory use is prohibited. If it's not on the list, it can't happen. So that's a really important thing to understand here, that we're dealing with a finite set of uses that could be on these sites. And then second and third bullets are really getting to the point that the uses themselves need to be for students, for faculty, for visitors to the site, that sort of thing. It's not for just general public use. So you can't get a strip center or something put in here that's open to the public to generate commercial sales or whatever it may be. It needs to be tied to the university, and the users need to be tied to the university in some way. So as far as the proposed primary uses, a very short list on the proposed Big Bend overlay, which is athletic and recreational facilities. Those could be outdoor or indoor or playgrounds. And then on the proposed South 40, any use of the grounds or buildings for teaching of college and university classes, research facilities, or similar functions, dormitories and residence halls, or detached multi-unit housing or multiple structures for the housing of students, faculty, staff, et cetera. So the uses that you see there are basically what's on the South 40 right now. So a continuation of the same uses that are already on the site. As far as the accessory uses, this is going to be a really hard list for you to see back there. But again, the draft overlays with all of these uses have been posted at engageclayton.com. The one thing I will point out, and please take a look at this and provide any comments you want tonight or at engageclayton.com on the list, is number 15. We've had quite a bit of conversation about that and whether or not we need to change that language up a little bit. It's kind of a catch-all provision where if we have a use that's similar to the things that are listed here, but doesn't fit it exactly, the Plan Commission can approve that use. So it's kind of recognizing we may not be able to capture all the potential uses that could go on these sites, but if they're similar in nature to those that are listed, then they could be considered. So we may play with that language a little bit because there's some concern that it may be a little too open for interpretation, or maybe it should go to the Board of Aldermen rather than the Plan Commission, that sort of thing. So we can talk through that. But just to give you an idea on the Big Bend site about the types of uses, if we had offices or medical uses, those would need to be related to athletics themselves. Auditoriums, we do have commencement or graduation exercises or special events there. Concessions, temporary buildings, solar and wind energy, which is throughout our code is permitted in any district. We wanted to be clear that that's allowed here as well. And when you get over to the South 40, catering facilities, dining, bookstores, greenhouses, libraries, those types of uses are listed there. So again, I recognize that this is probably hard to see, especially if you're in the room, but take a look at the uses. If you want to discuss these tonight, we certainly can do that as well. And then as far as additional use regulations, knowing that the accessory use list has events listed, we wanted some parameters for events to make sure that those didn't exceed a certain size. Washington University, and speaking with them, and they're going to hold some meetings and may discuss this a little bit more. We do say that if we have anticipated attendance of 3,000 or more, that they would have to get a special event permit through the city. So that way we know how traffic is handled, how parking is handled, the hours that the event would take place, the types of vendors that they may have. That way we can find out exactly what might be going on the site. But in no case could an event exceed 5,000 people. And so to give you an idea of how many people that is, if you think about like the music and wine festival that the city has, or Jazz Fest, if you've been to any of those in Carondelet Plaza, that's typically the range of people that we have at those. So if you think about that crowd, that's the size crowd that would be allowed on that site. So this is, again, a conversation we've had with some of the other neighborhoods we've talked to already. There've been a few concerns expressed about that number, and I'm sure there'll be some more conversation on it. But right now, 3,000 to 5,000 requires a special event permit, and you can't go over 5,000 attendees. And then on the South 40 site, the special restriction we have relates to the housing density itself. So currently, we don't have any housing density that's provided in the code. If you think back to when I put the uses up here, it's basically open-ended, colleges and universities, and anything that goes to support those is essentially permissible with a conditional use permit. So we don't get into density, but we wanted to get specific with that in the overlays. And so the current density on the site, not including the athletic fields, if you cut that portion out, is 94 units per acre. And so we're proposing that we just keep the 94 beds per acre, not units, but beds for the entire site. So would that result in a net gain in beds on the property? It would, but the density would not be increased. And so you could expect buildings that are probably similar in nature to what you already see on the site. You would just see buildings of that size and scale constructed on the area where those fields are already located. So we do have some density provisions built into this. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to Anna Crane, our Director of Planning and Development Services. She's going to walk through some site design standards. So I just talked a lot about use, and she's going to talk a lot about bulk restrictions, along with some other special provisions that we've put into this. So I'll turn it over to Anna.
All right. So combined a few things to go over this quickly. So if you have questions, feel free to jump in, but combine lot coverage and building height onto one slide for this. So proposed right now, as David mentioned early on, we regulate these using the R2 guidelines. So the R2 single family district was developed with the typical single family house in mind, as well as the typical size of a lot for that single family house in that zoning district. So a lot of those requirements, then translating them to the larger areas that we're talking about with both South 40 and with this Big Bend area, you end up with kind of a mismatch of height, building bulk, all of those. So what we're proposing is to realign some of those physical regulations for how the lot is developed based on the more detailed operations as we know them today. So start with Big Bend overlay. Proposed right now, we're limiting max impervious coverage to 40%, where currently the lot is 50%, or with plan commission approval could go up to 60. The reason we really were able to limit this is the primary operation of this Big Bend area is for athletic fields. So there's not a need for large building footprints and lots of parking areas and so on, where they can really consolidate those. So it allows us to have more pervious space, green space on the site. With the South 40, you can see the typical kind of outline of construction that they have there on the site today. That buildings will shift and parking may shift, but the idea of multiple buildings and drive access for vehicles and other things within the South 40 is going to continue. And so that's why we've kept with where we are with that maximum 60% coverage. Also on the South 40, because the use itself is going to involve more building footprints, we have maintained the existing limit that's in the code today that limits building footprints to 1/3 of the site. So that's an existing regulation that we would carry over. And then for both overlay districts, we're proposing very clearly stated that the amount of stormwater runoff cannot be increased. So that's an element that they, during site plan review of any projects for construction on the site, they would have to provide us with a calculation showing how stormwater is managed and that they're not going to create any new stormwater patterns that increase the runoff from what you see today within the overlays. As far as building heights go, another one that's very clearly aimed at the single family development. So right now it's 2 stories or 30 feet. So that's your typical single family home in this zoning district. But under the current provisions, it allows the college and university building to go up to 110 feet with increasing that setback based on how much above that 30 feet you go. Looking at what we have today, we're going to revise that and go 60 stories or 90 feet for proposed the Big Bend area, or 2 stories or 30 feet for the South 40. Oh, yep, sorry. Yep, they're flipped. Sorry about. This is South 40 is supposed to be 6 stories or 90 feet, and Big Bend is 6 stories or 72 feet. So we'll correct that table before we post this slide. Site access. So this is one that was important from a lot of our community discussions moving forward and the different neighborhoods discussions that we've had. So if you look at the map here, a big part of how do we integrate the new athletic facilities that are going to be located on the Big Bend overlay area, how do we integrate that with the Danforth campus and South 40 today? So in discussions with neighborhoods and with WashU, it's clear that the goal is to really prioritize pedestrian and bicycle access as our point. And so right now in our current regulation process, there is no prescriptive. So we don't outline where these connection points and site access points are. Again, we respond or react to what is being proposed under the conditional use. So through the overlay district, we're able to prescriptively add. So where are we going to require those access points and where might we prohibit those access points? So in order to enforce the bicycle and pedestrian as the main connectivity point for the Big Bend, we're requiring at this corner here at the northwest corner that there's bicycle and pedestrian access points that will connect all the way from Danforth through South 40 and down to the Big Bend overlay district. Up on the South 40 campus, the pedestrian and bicycle access points are also required. So we want to maintain them kind of where we have existing access points today here off of Forsyth and off of Big Bend, but also encourage them in both districts anywhere. So one of the things that we're doing here is if WashU and Concordia would like access points between their 2 campuses, it's allowed, but we are not requiring it. For vehicle access, Here, we're going to require that the main vehicle access point be off of Big Bend, but we're able to prohibit it from the northern boundary and then limit the southern boundary to emergency access only. And again, we would allow that connection through Concordia's property should they want it. Up on the South 40 campus, the primary vehicle access points are similar to what you see today. So the one would be allowed on Forsyth and one on Big Bend. Secondary access points for the South 40 area would only be for bicycle and pedestrian. Emergency access point would be here on Wydowns. This is an existing emergency access point, so that can't be the primary vehicle serving point. And then similarly on Big Bend, there's an existing emergency access. Should it be needed to be maintained, it would be. And then prohibiting vehicle access from the Skinker Heights neighborhood. So you can't have a new vehicle access point connecting into the South 40 from this neighborhood. Similarly, we would not allow a new vehicle access point to connect from the Hillcrest neighborhood down into the proposed overlay. Transition zones, this is another new concept. So really trying to enforce, and again, be prescriptive when it comes to how we develop the transition areas between our residential uses and our adjacent single family neighborhoods. So we've added in a requirement for a transition zone that really dictates what could be developed within these larger setback areas. Instead of just having a building setback within the code, we say not only can you not put a building here, but you also are going to need to have landscaping and other elements that really enhance the natural buffers that are there or extend them in some cases. So the proposed transition zones are as follows. For the Big Bend overlay district, we did analysis of where the existing large tree canopies are and where some of those existing setbacks are today, and looked at creating those as required transition zones. So for example, along the southern boundary, the existing kind of gymnasium building there is 80 feet. So we're extending what is a more well-developed tree and canopy coverage that's on the western portion and extending that transition zone to where they would need to plant some more trees and enhance it where the existing tennis courts and gymnasium are. Along Big Bend, we're proposing that this is a 100-foot transition zone. So again, this is where they wouldn't have any parking, they wouldn't have buildings. It really is trying to keep that natural transition, and then building off of a similar one here for the Hillcrest neighborhood. And this one's proposed as 90 feet. With the South 40 overlay, the approach is a little bit different. Again, we're looking at, we have an existing kind of development pattern with South 40 that we do not have with the Big Bend. So along the eastern end of the South 40, we have a transition zone that would be required if the properties here along University were sold and were no longer under common ownership. So right now, Washington University owns these properties here. If they were to sell them, then that would trigger the need for the transition zones to create that additional protection. Essentially right now, as the owners, these properties kind of serve as enhancing that transition zone before you actually enter the private properties within this neighborhood. Along Wydown, we have proposed 30-foot transition zone. And here a little bit differently from what we did in the Big Bend overlay again, there's some topography and other landscape, the way that is currently developed along Wydown that we want them to enhance. But given kind of the grade changes and other things, it gives some flexibility that the additional 30 feet within this, or I don't remember exactly, the additional setback here before the orange line allows some flexibility in how it's developed. So it doesn't require the same landscape plantings, but it also prevents buildings there. So setbacks here, so I just covered our goals of the transition zones in the Big Bend overlay. The setbacks really line up pretty well with what we were proposing for transition zones, with two exceptions. The first being where Fonfon is, and the second being where their neighbor Concordia will be. So the setbacks along here are slightly different depending on how tall the building is adjacent to Concordia. The goal there is to kind of mirror what the setback requirements for Concordia will be as they develop their new housing in this area, so that both neighbors kind of have similar approaches to that shared boundary line. The dashed line here This is our existing setbacks. So currently, right now, both the north and south property lines are considered side yards under our current R2 zoning and would have a setback of 15 feet. Unless the building went up to 110, and then in that case, you would be increasing the setback based on increasing the height. But generally speaking, a 30-story building or 30 feet building could be located 15 feet there. And similarly, Big Bend is currently a front yard, and that would be a 60-foot setback required under the current R2. So you can see where it comes to abutting or being close to our single family neighborhoods, we are proposing to increase those setback requirements to really protect that buffer. With the South 40 overlay, as I mentioned before, now we're dealing with much more of an existing condition that we want to slightly modify or enhance in certain areas. And so the proposed setback lines are much more similar to the existing conditions today. One area where we've lessened it slightly is David mentioned a goal of how they'll over time redevelop some of their housing on South 40 is to shift that kind of intensity focus north towards the Danforth campus. And so to reflect that, we are proposing a smaller setback along Forsyth than is currently required and a larger, slightly larger setback along Wydown than what is currently required as we kind of support that shift moving forward. Tree requirements. We currently, under the R2, have regulate this with caliper inch replacement. So that's really looking at as trees are removed, then what's replaced afterwards. What we're changing under the overlay district is again looking towards what's our ultimate goal, and that is providing a certain canopy coverage within these areas that will be maintained. And so instead of just replacing a tree that might be removed, we want to shift to how do we really enhance and develop these buffer zones, the transition zones, and I'll get into the established tree growth areas so that they're contributing to a solid canopy on the property and part of the overall city. So we were proposing a 20% canopy coverage minimum on the Big Bend site. So this we looked at with our contracted landscape architect, how the existing zones along the boundaries are currently planted because we want to allow for growth of our canopy coverage, but we can't overplant some of these transition zones. And then we recognize that the operational characteristic of the athletic fields means that there will be more areas within side of this overlay district that won't have large canopies because you won't be planting a large canopy tree that might then overhang your baseball field likely. So that's how we ended up with the 20%, whereas on the South 40, they will be able to kind of pocket growth some of these transition area or some of the canopy areas. And so that one's a slightly higher minimum of 25%. In addition to that, we have the established tree growth areas for the Big Bend. So these areas are outlined in our dark green highlights here, and they're kind of a funky shape. And the how we got to that is we looked at the existing survey that shows all of the trees and the size and where they're located on the property, as well as some topography and existing building footprint information. And what we wanted to do is capture large areas where there's existing larger mature growth as far as that canopy. But we also recognize that there are some areas that are going to need some regrading. Buildings are going to be removed, infrastructure such as sewer lines, water, electricity, all of those are going to be moved. And so there might be impacts to some of the areas. So for example, along Big Bend, in order to accommodate the turn lane that David will talk about in a minute, there's going to be some need for regrading here. And so that's how we kind of adjusted these established tree growth areas. These are in addition to the transition zone requirements that I briefly went over earlier. And really, this just adds another layer of protection to keep construction activity, regrading, other things out of the areas of really contributing trees on the site today. And also, again, reiterates this kind of proactive approach. So WashU will have to take, understanding that as trees die, we want to have those areas prepped so that there's more quickly a replacement of canopy as opposed to waiting for a big tree to be removed and then planting a small little one in its place, which will take many, many years to get back to that larger size. So this kind of goes back to that whole preactive approach that we're taking into the development of the sites. Some additional standards that I'll go into. So these are really directly tied between the operations, those uses that David was talking about, and then the regulations for the physical development. And one of those is lighting. So currently the city does have some lighting regulations in place that we wanted to further modify based on the proposed locations here and some of their other attributes. The first being requiring dark sky sports lighting certification. So dark sky is is a nonprofit that has a lot of guidelines and principles as far as lighting goes. And they really take a stance on how can we limit the impacts of lighting on our natural environment. So the outdoor certification program, I think, is a huge layer of benefit to the city of Clayton. Right now, the city contracts with St. Louis County to provide our electrical review and inspection services. And so this certification process will have dark sky certified inspectors come out, look at the property as it's installed to ensure that they're minimizing the spill of light. And that is kind of a skill and training that goes beyond what many of our inspectors have today, because they are not regularly inspecting electrical matters. And it also includes a review process before that inspection that I think will help. For the lighting of fields, we have limited the hours. So right now at midnight would be the time for the lights and the noise to go off. And so we've limited that down to 10:30 as proposed. And we've also modified the light level maximums based on what our current code says, down to 0.5 foot candles, which is essentially moonlight. And so we think that by having that requirement, that will also kind of reiterate the need for intentional planting and maintenance of our transition areas to help maintain the block, that visual block of light as you go around the edges of the property. The maximum height of field lighting is 80. We need that number to be balanced. We want them to be tall enough that it allows the angles of the lights to really be focused and efficient on lighting the fields in the manner that they're going to need to meet their minimum regulations for their fields, but also reduces that spillover and angle of light that might impact adjacent properties. So with 80-foot tall, you might be able to see the top of a light pole from some further away distance, but the actual light itself will not trespass to be on that property at a measurable amount. So again, that's where the combination of the light poles and the 0.5 foot candles at the end will help us really keep any sort of lighting within the interior of this property. And then for parking lot, roadway, pedestrian lighting, that sort of thing, the height of those poles would be a little bit lower because again, they're not trying to maximize the light the same way that you would with a field. For South 40, we have the dark sky principles as guidelines. So as the fields are phased down to this proposed overlay on Big Bend, the dark sky will still inform how lighting decisions are made. Dark sky covers everything from the color of light to the angle or type of light facility features and so on. So it will continue to be a principle for how lighting is developed on the South 40 property. We're lining up the time again with the same proposed time for Big Bend. And then many more of our existing municipal lighting standards are more directly applicable to the South 40 because we're kind of, as we transition some of those athletic elements down to Big Bend area, we can use some of our more standard building lighting principles that we have in our code. So noise is another one. Right now under our code, we really rely heavily on St. Louis County as far as mitigating certain noise. We don't really address it to the same extent that we do other operation and development characteristics for property. So outdoor games and music would be allowed 8 a.m. to midnight. What we're proposing is 7 a.m. to 10:30. 7 a.m. is directly aligns with our construction hours that we have in the city right now. So like an appropriate place to put us. We're also requiring primary and secondary speaker systems. The goal of this is that we know with these types of uses, you can see them on other Wash U fields, as well as just other college and university or lower high school fields. There's speaker systems that people will use to have announces and other elements during the game. But what we want to make sure is that Wash U knows ahead of time We don't want those systems to be used on a kind of regular basis when there's not a crowd or an audience that is engaging with the activity. So if a team in intramural is practicing on a field, they don't need to be using the announcement speaker system to play music. So instead, they'll have to have some sort of central or more targeted noise system that they would be using. And then we've also added specific decibel caps. And this is where the transition kind of goes from relying really on St. Louis County to bringing some of those regulations into our city municipal code. So 80 decibels is what we've proposed for steady noise, and 70 decibels is what we've proposed for repetitive noise. To give people an idea of kind of where we are today when it comes to noise. The city went out and took some noise readings at various locations around the existing Concordia site. So this captures the area that would be proposed for the Big Bend overlay. And you can see on the table here, and this will again all be uploaded onto the website, engageclaim.com. You can see when these readings were taken, the condition, weather conditions, and so on. But a lot of the readings are falling pretty similar to where we are proposing today. So we've got between high 60s during the morning conditions up into the high 70s, and that noise really is coming from Big Bend. So a lot of people kind of don't realize maybe what the noise level that you're hearing today when you're around the edges of the site would be compared to what we're proposing.
Okay, last element, and then we'll get into questions and comments and feedback, is the Big Bend Boulevard traffic assessment. So we engaged CBB, which is a engineering firm we've used multiple times for other traffic studies here in the city, to take a look at what impact the Big Bend area in particular, the athletic and recreational fields, what impact those would potentially have on the traffic on Big Bend, and whether or not there were elements that needed to be mitigated. So they went and gathered new traffic counts. Although we had a lot of information, we wanted the freshest data we could get with school in session. They went out and gathered traffic counts for Big Bend, along with the turning movements at key locations. So Southmoor Drive South, Oak Knoll Park, Wydown, and Clayton Road. So we got turning movement counts for all of those particular intersections. We also looked at the traffic demand for the conceptual athletic uses. So looking at the seating that's already existing at the Washington University baseball and softball facilities, looking at how many people might go to those games, what the anticipated seating may be inside of an auditorium, that sort of thing, along with the events. And we plugged that into this traffic model to see what impact it would have on the traffic conditions. And so this analysis was performed, and then we shared that information with St. Louis County Department of Transportation, who agreed with the findings in the analysis, and they've approved the assessment. Now, approving the assessment doesn't mean that they're okay with Washington University going in and installing the improvements. Before that could happen, there will need to be another study done when the specific uses for that site are known. So as soon as we have the actual counts for seats and other things, and we can come up with the trip generation, then that study will need to be performed again and submitted to the county. But at a conceptual level, they are in agreement with the findings of this study at this point in time. And so when you look at the findings of the study, the big thing that we were trying to figure out was whether or not a traffic signal would be warranted with the Big Bend entrance. And so the study found that it's not warranted during normal conditions. So just day-to-day activities with intramurals or maybe some practice for a baseball team, that sort of thing. It wouldn't be necessary to have a signal there. Cars could go in and out of the site without any issue. However, if there's a competition being held, so if there's an actual baseball game with spectators, if there's an event on campus or on this portion of the campus, the athletic site, then at that particular time, a traffic signal would be needed in order to have safe and efficient egress from the site. So if you think about a baseball game, if it had 200 people, and they had cars, or at least a portion of them had cars, and they tried to leave at the same time, everybody trying to get out of that site, especially if they're making left turns onto Big Bend, would take a very, very long time to get the site to actually empty out. And it creates a dangerous situation because cars actually get aggressive trying to shoot gaps in the Big Bend traffic. And anybody, I'm sure you're all familiar with that practice being on Big Bend. But if you had a lot of people that were waiting and were frustrated, I think the concern is that they would definitely try to shoot gaps and potentially cause accidents on the roadway. So during those events, the traffic study showed and the model showed that they would need a traffic signal for that egress. So there is a traffic signal that is proposed in the traffic study that would be aligned with the Oak Knoll Park entrance. And so that signal would run green all the time unless there was a car trying to leave Oak Knoll or a car trying to leave the athletic site. And so it's not built into the timing or the progression north and south on Big Bend. That intersection, one of the reasons the county really liked it and we really like it, is it creates a safe pedestrian crossing on Big Bend between Wydown and Clayton Road, which we currently don't have. So if you want to go to Oak Knoll Park, you've got to cross at one of those sides in order to get over. This provides pedestrian safety right there at the mid block because you can actually activate the signal, stop the cars and safely cross. There's also a proposed left turn lane into Oak Knoll Park, but what the county really liked was the center turn lane between Oak Knoll Park and Southmoor Drive South, primarily for, yes. Going to pull it up in just a moment, sir. I've got a diagram for you. And so this, and I'll show you on the diagram, makes things much easier for the Southmoor residents traveling north on Big Bend, trying to get into the neighborhood. And finally, when you plug the traffic signal and their analysis into their model to see what actually happens, the traffic signal doesn't impede any of the progress on Big Bend of traffic, the traffic progression itself. So you're not waiting at multiple lights. It's not adding a substantial amount of time to people that are traveling north or south on Big Bend. So the existing conditions, and you're all familiar with this. We've got a 4-lane road section here. Here's the Oak Knoll Park entrance. That's where the entrance to the athletic site would be. Here's the Southmoor Drive South entrance, and then further up, you've got the right in, right out, along with the north entrance from Southmoor at that location. And so this is a diagram, conceptual in nature, that shows these proposed improvements. So as Anna had stated with the tree growth area, there would need to be widening to accommodate the new lanes. All of that would take place on the athletic side or the east side of Big Bend. So on their actual site, you can see that there's a left turn lane for cars wanting to turn into Oak Knoll Park that would be created at that location. And then there would be this long center turn lane in between Southmoor Drive South and Oak Knoll Park. And that serves two purposes. First, for southbound traffic that wants to turn into the athletic site, you can see that there's a lot of stacking in order for them to make that turn and wait at that signal or wait for an opening in order to make that movement. But it also provides, and again, this was something that the county really liked, for the Southmoor residents that want to turn left into the neighborhood, instead of waiting to make that left turn in the lane of travel, which can back traffic up while you wait for an opening, you can actually pull into that center turn lane out of the lane of travel and then turn when you get an opening without impeding traffic behind you. So that's those are the proposed improvements that the study had identified as being necessary with the proposed project. Big Bend gets widened on the east side of the street, on the Concordia side of the road, in order to accommodate the additional width needed for the left turn lane and then that center turn lane. And then you can see it tapers back down to its current width by the time you get to the right in, right out that's at Fontbonne. So no land would be needed on the Southmoor side of the street. This entrance right here is designed to be right in only and right out only.
What about the 80% of the people that turn left out of there?
That's an illegal movement that if our
Maybe you
police
could
are there,
start arresting them.
so yeah, I realize it's an issue and we try to patrol that area, but that requires enforcement. So
That'd be great, little enforcement.
absolutely. Yes, sir.
The information
Mhm.
about what was going to be in there as far as the activities for athletics. And was it originally, they were talking about, or at least we heard that it was going to be like the practice field. Is this what field is going in there?
It's the baseball and softball fields that are located at Forsyth and Big Bend. the intramural field that's at CBT.
Okay, so that is, okay, that's an operating, right. Or they do intramurals there also?
That's correct. They
And
flex, they
practice.
flex their uses. That's correct.
It's not the main field.
It's not the football field. If that's
Okay.
what you're asking.
With stands, right?
Okay.
Okay.
If you could use a microphone, sir, so the people remote can hear you.
If there's a baseball game, is that where it's played? Going to be played? Not just practice.
Not just practice. It's the fields that are at the South 40 right now, which are competition fields. Those would be moved to the site.
Question for you.
Yes,
So, this has gone on 16 months. You started off, correct? So a
Thereabouts.
lot has changed now that WashU bought Fontbonne.
Mhm.
So can't you just leave this intersection alone and work behind Fontbonne and bring in some more access into this property through the Fontbonne property and that right interaction there?
So this parking lot actually goes away with this project. It's within the boundaries of the project itself. This alignment works really well because you can hit this at a straight angle. If you try to align it, for instance, with this up here, this Southmoor entrance, it's.
I understand the logic. I understand the design,
It's the most practical entrance.
but when you designed this, you had no ownership of Fontbonne. So
Correct.
have you gone back to the drawing board and say, hey, explore any other options within the Fontbonne?
We have not. So
Okay.
Fontbonne, we're looking at as a separate item because I don't think there's any intention to demolish any buildings or make room for this type of
Right.
grass on that site at this time.
So in terms of the unfortunate individual that lives on the end there,
Which,
that house right there,
this one?
coming out, there's a rear driveway exit out of that. So coming out of that exit from the rear drive to make a left-hand turn would be very difficult. I mean, as our kids grew up in Southmoor, the rule was never make a left-hand turn out of Southmoor because the traffic coming down is pretty brutal. And even if you're late for school, I'll deal with it because the fact is it's much safer to go right. Now, if you have that double lane, that left-hand turn lane going into the property for the new fields, you have that lane, the backup you talked about, you can stack them up. That's the word you use, stacked them up. How is that person going to get out of that driveway to make a left-hand turn, be able to go north on Big Bend?
Out of this street here?
No, please go down a little further right there.
I can't actually zoom.
But right there, trust me, I know there's a driveway
Sure.
right there. And how's that going to work out?
Well, if cars are stacked past that point, they would be impeded from making a left turn.
Yes. Okay.
But I wouldn't anticipate stacking there again unless there's a larger event or competition going on.
Right. Has there been other discussion also in this development here to be able to continue the nice walking path through Oak Knoll Park to bring that also to this property here to perhaps have a walkway for the?
Yeah, that's a
neighbors?
great point that I should have pointed out on this diagram as well, because the sidewalk isn't shown. So Washington University has been really clear that they have a desire to add a new wide path, like a 10 or 12-foot bike pedestrian path along this entire site. So down from the Danforth campus to the athletic facility. The nice thing about it is once you get to this point, a pedestrian that's on this wide path could actually activate that signal, come across to the Oak Knoll side, protected. And then we've had discussion at the city about adding a similar path on this side of the street that would continue all the way to Clayton Road.
Yeah.
So that people on this side of the road right now, as you know, when that sidewalk tapers down by Tuscany, you're really right on top of the street. So you actually have a safe wide path that would go all the way from Clayton Road, cross here safely, and then back up all the way to Wydown.
What about a winding path through the whole property of the baseball fields back in that area to extend the nice wide walkway from Oak Knoll down around all the baseball field
Through the
property?
site and around. If I'm sure there will be some sort of internal circulation, or they could put that trail there.
But
We
let-
can't require that they allow public access to our public facilities on their actual site. But I think they're probably willing to consider
Now's the time to ask.
an internal route. Absolutely.
Last question.
Yes.
Did you allude that the CBC property itself would be sold back to Clayton or be sold for development?
I don't believe it would be sold to the city of Clayton. Our hopes would be that it would be sold back onto
Developer.
the private market, go on the tax rolls and potentially be redeveloped. But that remains to be seen what the long-term use would be. But the uses that are at that site would all be moved to this particular location. So I'm not sure what use there would be at that point. The older building itself is not in good shape. So
Thank you.
thank you. Let me really quickly, if I can just let everybody know the next steps, and then let's continue with the questions and comments, and we'll see if we've got anybody online. I can go back to the traffic, we can go back to uses, we can go back to whatever it is you want to talk about. But really quickly, I just wanted to let you know that we're still gathering input at this point. We're going through a round of neighborhood meetings. This is our third neighborhood meeting of 5. So all the surrounding neighborhoods, we're having a similar conversation to get feedback on the overlay regulations, because we're attempting to finalize those here over the next couple of months. And then ultimately, just so you're aware of the process again, if this were to be put in place and actually approved, the Board of Aldermen would need to establish the overlay district regulations themselves. So putting those regulations into effect into our municipal code. In order to do that, we'd have to go through public hearings at the Plan Commission and then at the Board of Aldermen before it could be finalized. And then after that code section would be approved, then you would need to apply those regulations to the actual site. So that requires a change to the zoning map, also known as a rezoning. So we would need to go through the rezoning process in order to make that happen. Again, public hearings would be required at the Plan Commission and the Board of Aldermen. And both of those are city initiated actions. So there's not an application from WashU to establish the overlay districts. That's the city taking that action to be proactive. Because again, the other option is Washington University decides we're just going to apply for conditional use permits under the current single family zoning. So that would be a city initiated task. But concurrent to those overlays being considered, Concordia Seminary would submit a conditional use application to relocate the housing, which again is phase 1 of the entire project. But that's really their only intention at this point in time, is to relocate the housing. They don't have any other long-term plans on the site that would require the level of planning that we're seeing here for the 2 overlay districts. So just wanted to go through those next steps and get through this last slide real quick. And then again, I can bounce back to anything throughout the presentation you might want to talk about. And we've got a hand up.
Yeah, I had a
Go
question
ahead.
about, can you go back to the slide with the sidewalks in Oaknell? You mentioned Clayton might widen the sidewalk on the western portion by Oaknell,
Potentially,
potentially.
long-term after the other one. was
Long-term
installed.
suggestion would be move it away from the road. We requested when Oaknell was being redone in the parking lot that they move it to the top of the hill and taper it down so it kind of came in by the pond or lake, whatever you want to call it. Because it's got a sidewalk, but the power poles are in the middle of the sidewalk. If somebody has a double stroller, which
And if we were
thankfully
gonna,
I don't, they
and
can't.
if we were
They
going to
can't
go
get
in
there.
and redo it, we would make it wider and we wouldn't have the obstructions there. We can't go too far from the road with it. We'll probably have issues with the county because they're going to want a sidewalk within their right of way on that side. They were clear on the WashU side or on the east side of the street that if there was any reconfiguration or a new path that goes in, that it needs to be in close proximity to the roadway in order to replace the sidewalk that's there. But yes, that would absolutely be a consideration if we were going to redo it to make sure that it's clear of obstructions and wide.
So I have a question just on the process.
Yes.
In listening tonight, it seems like most of these decisions have been made kind of. And what I'm trying to ascertain is like, how much flexibility is there? Like, if all the people on Southmoor, for example, are really troubled from the 7:30 to 10:30, I realized, you felt like that was kind of a fair thing or whatever it was. But is there a chance to change that? Because 10:30 at night seems pretty late to have those lights on and all that noise for all those families living there. That seems super late to me.
Yes. So I want to be clear again, none of this is done. The institutions intend to do this. So again, it's either we go through the conditional use process or we try to get proactive. Staff's recommendation is still to be proactive and try to build these overlays and make sure that we can strike that balance between the institutions and the surrounding residential areas. That's the whole goal of this. As far as the regulations that you see here, this is all in draft form, and the purpose of these meetings is to hear if there are any concerns with these parameters. If you think 10:30 is too late and you think it should be 8 o'clock, then those are the kind of things we want to hear. Or if you think, you know, a setback should be increased by 10 feet, whatever it may be, now's the time to give us those comments. So none of this is done. I think what we need to recognize is we're going to be faced with either the conditional use applications or the overlay. As far as the project itself, we're going to have to address this as a community. Our preference would be to be proactive about it, and let's really dig in and have some conversations about what some suitable parameters might be. So if you have suggestions on that, now's the time to give us those. Or, and I'll always plug this, if you go to engageclayton.com, and I'm sure a lot of you have been there, you can see everything that's been uploaded to date. So draft regulations, every presentation, we're recording this and we're going to upload that as well. Leave comments on that site and we check those on a regular basis. However you want to get feedback to us, now's the time to do it, because we are trying to finalize this so that we can go through a process of consideration. So yeah, have at it tonight. If there are items you want to see adjusted, let us know. I'm sorry?
My feedback would be 10:30 seems too late.
Okay. That's excellent. Yes, sir. If you, let's get you a microphone really quickly here.
So you have photos of what it looks like now. Do you have what it's going to look like what your improvements are going to be, where they're going to be, what it's going to look like?
No, we don't, sir. So right now what we have are some conceptual test fits. I think you came in a few minutes after we had this up.
Well, if you're trying to move it forward without having that, I don't, you know, for everybody to conceptualize what you're talking about, it's really hard to follow. And I'm not even in the real estate business. So I don't, you know, when is that going to come out? You need a conceptual plan of where everything is going to be.
We won't have specific layouts as we go through this process. Those would need to be.
That's going to be hard to get people on board
So
to
what we're trying to
understand what they would want, how they might want it to look like. If we doing a commercial building, we have to bring that up as part of even getting it rezoned. And none of that, this is hard. I came in a little late. I didn't know what I missed, but without that, it's impossible to make suggestions on what somebody, you know, what we want as a community.
Well, the idea is to build the box, so to speak, that the development would occur in. If
Now,
somebody-
are you
No,
representing
if
Clayton?
I could finish,
Washington?
this,
Washington, you?
sir, if I could finish my answer very quickly. If a house is proposed in the city, we basically know, even though we can't see the architectural drawings yet, we know what it's going to look like. If your neighbor says, hey,
It's the placement of it.
if
too.
that's, I'm going to knock my house down and I'm going to build a new one, the zoning parameters are already in place. You can look at the code and you know it's not going to exceed this height. It's not going to have setbacks that are any closer than this. You know exactly what that box looks like. And that house has to fit that box in order to be approved. And so we're trying to build for this site as the box. And later on, those individual buildings or fields, they're going to be proposed to the city, but we should all have an understanding about what those should actually look like when they're developed, or what the rules will be that they'll be playing with. So the 100-foot, you know, buffer or transition zone from Big Bend, we know the trees that can't be touched on the site. We know the maximum heights. We know the lighting standards. We're trying to put all of those rules in place. If we don't do that and we go the other route, you will have specificity along with a conditional use permit, but we're going to have to basically try to tighten rules or do things to mitigate impacts on the fly. And it's going to be a very reactive approach that is going to be from a starting point that's basically wide open for the university. So that's
Right.
that's the idea here.
And is this affecting the seminary? And what about, and I heard you mention what's happening, you're not doing anything, this doesn't involve Fonpont yet, is that right, or it does?
Well, it doesn't. So when you say the seminary, Concordia would need to move the housing that's along Big Bend interior to their site to make all of this happen. So that's an impact to the seminary property. That would be an application that they would make. As far as Fontbond's a separate item from this altogether. Washington University doesn't have any plans for the Fontbond site. Fontbond will continue to operate that through the summer of 2025. But what happens after that, is still unknown. So to try to build,
Okay, so that's
Really-
another meeting,
What's it-
another time.
right, and so if they propose a change of use or they want to master plan that site, then we'll go back to the community with a similar exercise. But for us to try to tailor a zoning district for Font Pond when we don't know how it would be used long-term is, not the way we're going to spend our time at the moment. Yes, sir.
Can I ask a couple of questions?
Of course.
I recognize you're trying to build a framework within which the university and the city can proceed. But of course, as neighbors, we're trying to have impact on that framework.
Yes.
If I understood your comment about St. Louis transportation, that was merely a speculative solution on their part. The final solution of access to the site will depend on the actual development plans.
So they'll require that a detailed study, another study or a revision to the study be submitted when the final uses are known, when we know exactly how many seats and those types of things for those facilities, then that'll need to be fine tuned. But-
So that solution that we see today may be very different than the final solution.
I would say that's probably doubtful. I
So,
think this is pretty close to what you would end up seeing, but they won't give a final approval until those final uses are known.
so in all of this, there's a certain amount of confusion, miscommunication, et cetera. I attended a meeting with St. Louis County Highways in which they represented that the university had come to them saying that there were only 2 playing fields and did not mention the gymnasium nor the possibility of 3,000 people attending events. So I'm left wondering what was really presented to Highways, who's representing what is the ultimate use on the site? Can I keep running my mouth?
So the traffic engineers prepared this study. The information didn't go
Understand that.
direct from WashU to St. Louis County Transportation.
But St. Louis County Transportation represented to 2 of us in a
Okay.
meeting with them, that when Washington University spoke with them, they mentioned 2 playing fields, 250 participants, end of story. No mention of a gymnasium, no mention of 3,000 people.
Okay, well, let me check with St. Louis County on that.
Pardon,
Let me check with St. Louis County and the
Please.
traffic engineers. on that.
please.
Okay.
Next question. John, can you grab the photo? One of our other confusions or misunderstandings is the permitted buildings on the site. So we understand there could be a 6-story building, 72 feet in height, set 100 foot back from the property line, which is what this 2-scale drawing represents. And I just want to make sure we're understanding that as neighbors, we could in fact see a building just like that marching along Big Bend Boulevard. And just to further the discussion, this could be for student lectures, musical performances. This could be for commencement, could be an auditorium, or any permitted uses for students, faculties, employees of the university to support university uses. It is not restricted merely to athletics.
So you're talking about the South 40 site? Or
No, I'm talking
Big
about.
Bend? I'm sorry, look at the
This is
setback.
this is language from the proposed overlay district.
So let me say this first. The drawing you have there, I assume you've got that building superimposed 100 feet back?
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
so I do want everybody to understand that currently that building could be built at,
This isn't a question of what could currently.
oh, no, I
be done.
just want to make sure everybody understands that though.
I understand
Because there are a
that.
lot of folks
I
that
understand.
that
I
think
understand.
that this is something that
I-
enables this.
I understand that.
That they could go taller than this
I
building
I
and
understand.
as close, right?
I understand that.
Okay.
But we're looking for definition in the overlay district
Mhm.
for language that is residents of Clayton, help protect us, helps protect our environment.
So the first one is the design characteristic, then they went into use, and I was looking at the design part. So let me go to the list of uses here. And the specific use you brought up was,
So for example, could be number 3, an auditorium,
correct,
could be 4, band playing and practice.
yes,
Number 5, commencement.
Correct.
Number 10, student and university lectures. Or any, and under D, prohibited uses, it says, all permitted uses shall be provided for students, faculty, and employees of the university or patrons visiting the site to support university uses or patrons associated with an event. It does not restrict it merely to athletics.
That's correct.
So we ultimately end up with this big confusion. We're being told this is an athletic facility for Washington University, but it could be much more than that.
And the reason is a lot of the recreational or auditory or gymnasium type buildings, you have flex and function. So they'll have athletic uses, but you also have other things. You can go to a concert at Chaffetz Arena, for example, even though there's nothing proposed of that size here. It just goes to, as an example of
Okay, so
the flexible use of these. Same
let's-
with athletic fields.
So you're looking to propose a framework apparently wrapped around athletic uses. So would you prohibit any uses not associated with athletics as part of the overlay district language?
That's something we could discuss.
Okay? And how will that discussion take place? Amongst you,
Yeah, so
yourself,
we'll discuss.
amongst Wash U and you?
So we'll
amongst-
discuss that internally. We'll discuss that with WashU and we can discuss that with the community. So. I mean,
As-
that's the kind of feedback we're looking for. And those, I can't give you
Well, I
a
think
straight
we-
answer right now whether or not it would be cut, but
I can keep going with questions and questions, but is there a way that, and Southmoor requested a meeting with your offices prior to this meeting so we could have a greater understanding and put our questions out. Is there a way, it's now 8:30 in the evening, is there a way that we could have such a meeting to put all of our views out on the table?
that was the purpose of this meeting.
I think
We can do that if you'd like.
unfortunately, the time has gotten short. Is there another opportunity for us?
I mean, we could set up another meeting if you'd like.
I would.
I think you can also, which is what I responded when you asked it, you can send questions too prior to setting up the meeting if
Right.
you're expecting us to have a
I'm looking,
response.
I'm looking for the give and take so that we can understand. We don't want to assume incorrectly. We don't want to be wrong in what we're understanding in all this. So I think it's the opportunity for us as neighbors, as Clayton residents, to have a give and take conversation rather than trying to put this in writing, typing it out and expecting an answer back. Yes, we would like another meeting with you all.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss this evening?
Once we have another opportunity to meet with you all, no, I'll let someone else have an opportunity to talk.
And before we have that meeting, does anyone have any questions about the project? It sounds like we'll receive a lot of comments at the meeting, but are there questions generally to help your understanding of what's been proposed or what the city is working on from a regulatory standpoint? That would be helpful before the next meeting.
I have a question about parking.
Yes.
It seems from what you've said that it's a little early to know how many parking spaces are allocated within the proposed area at Big Bend. Is
Correct.
that right?
Yes. So before anything could be built, there will need to be a parking study to show the anticipated parking demand for each of the individual uses on the site. So that'll need to be updated each time a specific use is proposed. We want to tailor the parking to the uses that end up being there.
Okay, well,
We don't
one
wanna
of
just
the,
throw in
one of
every
the
park.
uses is going to be athletic events at which 3,000 to 5,000 people may be
Not-
in attendance.
Not an athletic event. That would maybe be a one-off special event that they may hold there. As far as the regular athletic events, they don't anticipate having any more than 250 people at an event ever. And the regular attendance is much lower than that.
Okay, well,
Oh.
when the 3,000 to 5,000 people show up, there isn't going to be room to park that many cars in that area, no matter how much space you allocate. You
Yeah, I don't-
wouldn't have room for playing fields if you had parking lots.
Yeah, I
for
don't
that.
know that anyone anticipates 3,000 to 5,000 people for an athletic event there. And again, a permit would be.
For
required.
whatever
So you-
event.
So you know in advance.
For
but-
whatever event.
Sure. And that's why we would want to have that special use permit. The other thing we need to factor in is the shuttle system that they have. So these are all things that will need to be specified in those individual parking studies. But as far as setting up parking on the site for 5,000 people, I don't think that's the idea here. Then you're going to run into runoff concerns and everything else, and you're going to have a large parking field that's never really utilized. So we're going to try to tailor this to the uses that you can anticipate there on a regular basis.
Thank you.
Would you mind going to the slide with the like illustration of the roads for me, please?
Yes.
So it's been mentioned a few times, but I want to make sure that it's super clear. So it is sort of a running joke in Southmoor, like turning left is sort of like gambling with your life, because cars come flying over and everyone turns left, which if this happens and this stays here, there'll be lots of accidents. And I'm sure Wash, you could help us with that. But so right now, the way that traffic is, turning left is dangerous. I think what you're going to find is if we have, let's say, like my kids do lots of sports. So you know, there's going to be quite a few people here using this facility, I hope. I mean, if they don't use it, I would call it a failure, right? So if it's successful, it will always be used, right? And so the stress is, it's going to be even harder for us to leave. Now, this proposed situation here, I think it looks like, you know, draw a nice little radius, like we're contemplating how to get in here, but we still can't get out, right? Like maybe I could try to like turn left really quick and hide in this little corner, maybe, right? And then maybe go. But I think this is like a safety concern. This isn't like, how are the trees? You know, this is like, you know, we get maybe once or twice a month, we almost get hit. And that's a regular family thing. So just to sort of give you guys kind of a sense of where some of the tension might lie and how, like, I don't see any solution to that, even though there's going to be a lot more pressure. So that would be something to think about. I did hear somebody say there's a traffic study and Southmoor doesn't have enough like population to do anything, right? As a resident, that is concerning to me because like, you know, like I think we do matter, but anyway, so some consideration would be cool. And I don't quite see that yet.
Great. Thank you.
I'll make this quick. I just wanted to clarify something. So we're calling this an athletic area and these 8 sort of hypotheticals that we're looking at, I can't see them very well from here, but they're all about athletic fields and soccer and baseball and gymnasiums and all that kind of stuff. But once they're there, if you want to have graduation at the soccer stadium with 3,000 to 5,000, with 3,000 or 2,999 people or something, that's all okay, even though graduation is not an athletic event. Or you could have a lecture, outdoor lecture there, or you could have, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so we're calling it an athletic field, but it doesn't have to be athletics.
We're recognizing that athletic fields traditionally have other activities on them. And so that's what we're trying to build into that accessory use
Okay.
area and trying to figure out what's the appropriate number for a special event permit. So we have 3,000 in there and we can talk about that number. And 5,000 is the cap we put in. But again, I don't want to speak for Washington University. I don't think the intention is to have events of that size on a regular basis whatsoever. I think that is going to be
But somehow they're going to build something that'll hold 3,000 to 5,000 people, but yet when they have a baseball game, only 250 people show up.
no, it's not going to have seats for 3,000 to 5,000. I mean, it's just like, for instance, I mentioned Jazz Fest or Food and Wine. I mean, we put 3,000 to 5,000 people in Carondelet Plaza. It's not built as an entertainment venue, but it's an open space. So if you hold an event, you can put people on it. And so these open fields that you have here, if you had an event, you could easily fit. I mean, if you think about the size of that area versus the size of this, you could easily fit 3,000 to 5,000 people on one of these fields, but they're not designed for that. That's not something that would be done on a regular basis, and that's an extreme one-off. I don't know that commencement would be held here either, given the facilities that they have on their campus. They don't intend to change whatsoever.
I said commencement just because it was up there.
Oh, I know.
I
But
didn't-
that's the first one folks think of, and everybody knows that's a large event.
Okay, so from the very beginning, I apologize. This is my first meeting, so you're
Sure.
David and you actually work for the city of Clayton?
Yes, I apologize if I didn't say that at the beginning.
Okay.
I'm David Gibson. I'm the
So-
city manager.
So
Nice
the
to meet
best
you.
that we have in the room, you're our advocate
Correct.
to understand our concerns, right?
That is correct.
With all due respect, I should have lent you my pen because I haven't seen anyone take one note. Okay, thank you. I appreciate
Yeah.
that. Just my observation.
Okay.
So it's, I feel like I'm interviewing someone that doesn't write anything down. But besides that, as John alluded to, the traffic and the left-hand turn, as I talked about earlier, the number of people that come into our neighborhood to do U-turns, by the way, because I am the first house on the left there, it's pretty crazy, the number of people that do come in that way. And if one of those 8 or whatever number of schemes were designed, it'd be maybe of interest of Southmoor that all the lighting would maybe face like east and not towards, over towards the west side of Southmoor itself. Trails, access, whatever it can do to enhance it, because it's my opinion, this is already a done deal. And you're not gonna, it's like Centene, you're not gonna stop that train. So we just have to make it the best we can. I like to have tennis court access. I don't know about you guys, but besides that, we just want to make it the most positive experience for that area itself, because we have vested interest in our subdivision, but more importantly, the safety for our kids and people coming in and out of Southmoor.
Great. Thank you for your comments. And I do want to say one thing, just be really clear. We are advocating for the residents. We do work for you all, and we are trying to balance all of the interests in the city. So, we've got institutions here, and that's a part of our community. And we've got residential areas, and it's a part of our community. And there are going to be conflict points where those two touch. And that's what we're trying to work through. And the reason we've been doing this for 16 months is we're trying to get it right. And we're trying to strike that balance to protect the neighborhoods. And that's why we continue to have these public meetings. So the feedback is really, really important. And we want to hear that because we are trying to advocate for you. And we do recognize that the process that's been in place for a long time has not served us well. And in the larger meeting, I know we talked about it. I think that slide was kind of hanging on the end and we didn't even show it. But, I think the most telling thing, oh, that's just a lighting height at Shell Park. Let's see. Is this slide here? And I showed this at the public meeting at the high school. And this is all of the conditional use permits that have been approved on the South 40. We think all, because they're difficult to find because we've just got a stack of files. And each one of these buildings or each thing that took place on that site has a different set of approvals and a different set of regulations for every building there. And this is completely, well, it's nearly impossible to actually enforce any of this, let alone understand what the rules and regulations are, because it's been done piecemeal over a long period of time, and it's extremely confusing. You could have buildings next to each other with completely different sets of standards. So enforcing that in the end and operating under that becomes very, very cumbersome. And so what we'd like to do, knowing that we have long-term projects that are being proposed by Washington University in particular, is avoid this situation and set up all the rules in the beginning and put those into our municipal code so it's in black and white and everybody knows exactly what the rules are. And so what we spent the 16 months doing and what we continue to do through these conversations is tailor this to the point where the community feels comfortable that we struck that balance. So any kind of comments you want to submit, we'll set up another meeting to discuss individual parameters if you'd like, but that's the end goal and that's why we're here and that's why we're doing this. So I just want to be very, very clear about that. Looks like we've got a speaker here from Washington University. Joanna Schooler.
Hi, I'm Joanna Schooler. We've talked about uses at the Big Bend Overlay District as athletic uses for baseball and softball. Typically, for the types of games that Washington University has in terms of baseball and softball, it would have to be a rival team where it was a playoff event, and I mean a very big rival, where we would have a crowd anywhere near 200 to 250 people on site. In terms of the numbers that we're talking about, these are special permit uses. We don't anticipate those types of numbers at all on this site. You may have people for a game, you may have somebody using the tennis courts at the same time. You can anticipate those types of things happening on that site. Our commencement facilities, we're pretty pleased with in terms of what we have currently at the Danforth campus. And that's where our center of campus is. That's what all of this, a lot of this is focused on, ensuring that our center of campus can continue to be used in the ways that are important to us. So just want to address these numbers that are coming up here.
Sir, if you could use the microphone, there's another one floating around here. We just need to, we need to be able to have the folks on Zoom hear you. Thank you.
Ms. Schoolman, would I be correct then if the 3,000 was removed from the overlay district and in fact limited to 250 or 500 participants, Washington University would be comfortable with that language?
I think certainly we want to all hear the feedback on the numbers that you are talking about. That number that is placed up there is right now a number for you to react to. But we need to be able to use this facility in a way where we would be able to use multiple fields at the same time and to be able to use the multiple settings at the same time. But certainly this is where everybody's trying to hear this feedback.
I'm giving you feedback, but
And I'm hearing you, I'm hearing you, I'm hearing your feedback, but we certainly are gonna need to be able to hear the feedback and react to it.
My feedback, and thank you for being here as well. It's nice to hear from your side. I've watched you. How about, can we definitely put language in this program of not having the 13 carnival though at that location based upon our last week's experience?
I think we feel comfortable with where we have our 13 carnival right now at the Danforth campus, absolutely. Thank you.
And I will mention, I know that Washington University has discussed having meetings with residents as well. So keep an eye out for that because I'm sure there are a lot of questions that you all have for them. And they're going to provide that opportunity. Any other questions this evening, either in here or online? If you're online, if you want to hit the raise hand button, then we can call on you. We've just got a couple of minutes left, but anybody'd like to say anything, now's the opportunity. I love it. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. This is a great community and I thoroughly enjoy what I do. And, you know, in the end, when you strike that balance and you make something work for the entire community, there's really no better feeling than that. So thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it. All right. Well, thank you all for being here this evening. We're going to set up another meeting with you so we can go over some things in more detail. And again, look for something from Washington University and Concordia Seminary to have a conversation about their long-term intentions. I'm sure there are plenty of questions you have that we wouldn't be comfortable answering for them. So we'll make sure you get that opportunity and we'll keep pushing forward with it. So thank you all very much. I appreciate your time this evening.